The fax machine is practically obsolete now, but as the 1980s turned into the 1990s, it was seen as a game-changing technology that would revolutionize the sharing of images forever, growing from just 500,000 machines in use to over 5 million in just 5 years. Despite the machine not catching on in popularity for over a century, the underlying technology was surprisingly invented all the way back in 1843. Instead of revolutionizing communication as it one day would, however, the cutthroat Wild West of inventing in the mid-1800s left its brilliant creator bankrupt and creatively broken. Alexander Bain was a polymath when it came to inventing, able to look at a wide range of technologies and find improvements. But ultimately, it wasn't a lack of intelligence toward mechanics that would lead to his downfall, but rather thieves attempting to steal his intellectual property. This is the story of Alexander Bain and the invention of the facsimile machine, and this is Learn Something New. Alexander Bain was born on October 12, 1810 near the small Scotland town of Wotton. His father was a crofter, someone who would watch over and tend to a farm. And like many other farming families of the time, Bain's was a large one, with him being one of 12 children. As such, he spent nearly all of his time helping on his father's farm, leaving school at the age of 12 to further dedicate himself to tending to the land. But Alexander Bain quickly found himself more drawn in with the pastime of fixing things around the farm rather than strictly agriculture itself. At the age of 20, he decided to become an apprentice to a clockmaker in a nearby town. It was during this time that he would attend a lecture that would change his life's direction. The lecture, which was titled Light, Heat, and the Electric Fluid, opened his mind to the possibilities of a future driven by technology. He would say of the event, when the lecture was over and the audience were leaving, a few gentlemen accompanied the lecturer and conversed with him on the subjects of the lecture. There was a humble lad walking behind them and listening attentively to what was said. He never forgot the lecture nor the subsequent conversation. After 7 years of his clockmaking apprenticeship, he decided to move to a bigger city, finding his way to London, where he would attend more lectures by some of the leading innovators of the time. One of these lectures showed a clock that used static electricity to maintain the swinging of its pendulum. But Bain, having spent over 7 years of his life making clocks, saw this design as impractical, inefficient, and inept. Within the next few years, he had made his own clock, powered by an electric current that used an electromagnet to swing the pendulum between two other magnets to keep its swing consistent. Bain felt that his clock was a vast improvement on the other models in the market at the time, but he didn't have the necessary funds to develop his inventions to the point where they could be produced on a large scale. Mentioning this to the editor of a London magazine, he was introduced to a fellow inventor, Sir Charles Wheatstone. Bain showed off his electric clock to Wheatstone in confidence and asked him for his opinions. In response, Wheatstone reportedly replied that Bain shouldn't even bother developing it any further because there was no future in these electric clocks. Bain was crushed at the news, but he decided to take a patent out on this invention just in case things changed. Just 3 months later, Bain would be shocked to find that Sir Charles Wheatstone was presenting an electric clock just like the one he had been shown to the Royal Society, claiming that it was his own invention. As it turned out, Wheatstone actually had really liked Bain's clock design, enough to steal the idea and try and pass it off as his own. When Wheatstone tried to patent it, however, he found that Bain's patent was pending. He went as far as to try and block Bain's patent from being issued, but failed. The two men would part ways, hoping never to speak again, but Wheatstone would later get into another legal battle over technologies relating to the telegraph, a fight that would rope Bain into the conflict once again. You see, Wheatstone had registered for the formation of the Electric Telegraph Company, where messages would be encoded on a strip of paper, which could then be run through the telegraph, actuating the key consistently and accurately. This was a great idea that worked really well, except for one thing. The strip of paper method had been patented by Alexander Bain in 1846. The strip is still referred to as the Wheatstone perforator and was seen as so ingenious that it laid the foundation for the stock market ticker tape in the century to come. Alexander Bain presented evidence of his patent on the strip system to the courts, and the House of Lords in London compelled Wheatstone's Electric Telegraph Company to pay Bain £10,000 for its use without his permission, and to give him a job at the company, something that irritated Wheatstone so much that he resigned, refusing to work side by side with Bain. Bain, in the meantime, was becoming increasingly interested with the applications of the telegraph beyond simple messages. Near the end of 1841, he patented a method of using telegraph signals to control railway engines, turning off steam, marking time, giving signals, and printing information at different locations. And while this was significant for the burgeoning rail industry, the revolutionary invention he would become known for would come to fruition in 1843. Utilizing everything he had worked on up to that point, from his pendulum-based clock to his understanding of telegraphy, he would make the very first fax machine. In 1843, Alexander Bain used a clock to synchronize the movement of two pendulums for a line-by-line scanning of a message. The message had metal pins throughout, and after an electric probe scanned the pins, transmitting the order in on-off pulses, a receiving station could then reproduce the message on electrochemically sensitive paper. Within just 10 years of the first electric telegraph's invention, Alexander Bain had figured out how to send images across a wire over great distances. And because of its ability to send an approximate recreation of an image to a different location, it became known as a facsimile machine, which in Latin means to make similar, though this word would eventually just be shortened to fax machine. Bain believed that this technology would revolutionize messaging throughout the world, and wanted to move quickly on it before anyone like Wheatstone could swoop in and steal it. He was already considered a wealthy man from his numerous other inventions, both from their sales and royalties, so he felt comfortable not just expanding in Europe, but also in America, where Samuel Morse's telegraph and code were rapidly expanding throughout the nation. But this would prove to be Bain's folly. He had seen time and again that if you weren't a first mover on a technology, you could lose out. But he went too big, too fast, and it crushed him. Not only did his fax machine have numerous issues, including that most images couldn't be easily discerned because of their low quality, but the machine also tended to be time-consuming to use and easy to make mistakes on, unlike the more simplistic telegraph messaging system that simply required one to know how to tap out and receive messages. As Bain was rushing to try and rapidly implement his system, others were improving upon it, leaving his model outdated. There were also a number of lawsuits levied against him in the US from dominant companies in the space, who had far-reaching protections in their patents, protecting literally anything transmitted via wire, including patents held by Samuel Morse himself, who was already seen as an American hero at this time. Feel free to check out my video on Samuel Morse and inventing the telegraph. But while Bain lost some of these legal battles and won others, it didn't matter in the end. In fighting them, he'd lost all of his money. Unable to get a foothold in the US market, he gave up. After his unabated failure in the United States, Bain returned to London in 1851. His legal costs had been extremely high, and he eventually applied for bankruptcy with debts of around $58,000 that he simply couldn't pay. Every single one of his patents were surrendered in the bankruptcy proceedings, and he was let go from his position with the Electric Telegraph Company. Seeing himself as a failure, he decided to go off and just start selling his electric clocks. But in a time where electrical connections were still fairly rare and the clocks themselves seen as luxury items, they didn't sell well, forcing Bain to move to Glasgow, where he was left repairing clocks for a living, making just enough to get by. One of his customers eventually got to know him and learned of his accomplishments and his extensive contributions to the telegraph's innovation. This customer, who would later be known as Lord Kelvin, petitioned the Royal Society to grant Bain £150 for his contributions to science. He also managed to petition the Gladstone government to award Bain a pension of £80 per year for the rest of his life. A far cry from the heights he had reached earlier, but enough to get by. Alexander Bain passed away in 1877. His inventions and innovations on everything from clocks to fire alarms, from regulators to drinking fountains, and yes, the first fax machine, proved that he never saw any device as perfect. Everything had room for improvement. Yet, he lived in a cutthroat time for inventors, a time where if you weren't prepared to fight day in and day out for the rights to your intellectual property to be upheld, then they would be taken from you. And it was a battle Bain would eventually lose. Bain was pretty much forgotten by the time of his death. His tombstone didn't even read the right year that he had passed away in, but it would be corrected in 1959. And in 2016, he was posthumously awarded the Technology and Engineering Emmy Award for his pioneering work in the transmission of images. Thank you for watching Learn Something New. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Or if you want, you can check out the channel's Patreon, linked below in the description. A very special thanks to the channel's patrons who make these videos possible. But as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.